fall of 2018. The Reverend Gene Bacon filled in for me, and he preached 9 sermons on the text that we heard this morning, the Beatitudes, from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. So I know that many of our church members have already delved deeply into Jesus' words. However, because today is Scout Sunday, there are a few families with us here this morning who were not here back then to hear those 9 sermons. In fact, I suspect there may be some people who were here back then who may not remember everything that Reverend Bacon said. So we'll do it again just for fun. And furthermore, I looked back in the files and realized I tackled the same topic back in March of last year during Lent, using Brian McLaren's treatment from his book, We Make the Road by Walking. That sermon, which I entitled Jesus Proposes a New Identity, was not only recorded so that you can view it on our website, it was also the topic of one of the 10 feedback forums, which were recorded also and uploaded to our website. So it's available verbatim, and I dare not just repeat myself. But for the folks who are here new this morning, and those of you who may have forgotten what I said last year about the Beatitudes, let me summarize. And then after that, I'll add a few comments about that foolish man who built his house on sand, which our choir sang about so brilliantly this morning. And it served as the conclusion to Jesus' sermon. Now, what our scouts read for us and then built here in these blocks were the opening words of Jesus' sermon. And then Wyatt Smith read for us the closing words. This inaugural sermon set Jesus' social agenda somewhat like a political party platform does in an election year. Jesus began his sermon by using the word blessed several times to point to people with certain characteristics. In Jesus' day, if you said, blessed are these people, it means something like, pay attention. These are the kind of people you should aspire to be like. This is the group that you want to belong to. And then he names them, just as our scouts did this morning using those 7 building blocks. People who are poor in spirit, people who mourn, people who hunger and thirst for righteousness, people who are merciful, who are pure in heart, who are peacemakers, and those who are persecuted, that is, who are picked on and bullied because they are that way. Because they're being meek, because they're being merciful, because they're being peaceful, they're being bullied. Jesus' words would have surprised everyone. You see, that's because, again, as Brian McLaren says, we normally play by different rules. For many people in our society, these are the rules of the game. Are you ready? You do everything you can to get rich and powerful, because then you can get things your way. Then you'll be successful, you'll be powerful. And to be poor in spirit, that's to be a loser. Second, toughen up. Harden yourself against all feelings of loss, because loss is for losers. Grief is for wimps. Big boys don't cry. Rule number 3, measure your success by how much of the time you're able to think about yourself and your own happiness. Now, people may call that egocentric selfishness. They may say narcissism, but you can slough that off, because who cares what they think? It's really all about you anyway, right? After all, if your name isn't being held in high regard, what do you have to show for all your efforts? Get a clue. You got to look out for number 1. Be independent and aggressive. Be hungry and thirsty for higher status in the social pecking order. I mean, that's what counts. You got to be somebody. You got to make a name for yourself. Who's hungry and thirsty for righteousness anyway? I mean, get a cheeseburger. Rule number 5, strike back quickly when others strike you. Mercy is for wimps and losers. They're for weaklings. And then guard your image so that you will always be popular regardless of what you do. In a world like that, Jesus defines success and blessedness in a profoundly different way. It was subversive, the things he said. It was a radical reversal of the conventional way of thinking. According to Jesus, who is it that's blessed? What kinds of people should we be seeking to identify ourselves with? The poor and those in solidarity with them. Those who mourn, that is, they're able to feel grief, they can feel loss. The nonviolent and the gentle, that is, the meek, the humble. those who hunger and thirst for the common good, which is Brian McLaren's word for righteousness, those who are not satisfied with the status quo and they want to see things change, the merciful, the compassionate people, those who are characterized by openness and sincerity, motives that are unadulterated by profit and greed or by self-aggrandizement or power, those who work for peace and reconciliation, those who seek justice even when they are misunderstood for doing so, and those who stand for social justice as the prophets did, those who refuse to back down, refuse to quiet down when they are being slandered, when they're being mocked or misrepresented, when they're being threatened, when they're even being harmed. That's quite a list, isn't it, Scouts? Wow. Jesus had been speaking only for a few minutes, and already in that list, he had turned our normal status ladder and social pyramid upside down. He advocates an identity that's characterized by solidarity, by sensitivity, by nonviolence. And Jesus lifts up for us as role models, people who long for justice, people who embody compassion, people who manifest integrity in their character. He creates a new kind of hero in those Beatitudes. It's not a warrior hero. It's not a corporate executive or politician or celebrity, but rather brave and determined activists for peace. People who are willing to suffer with him in that prophetic tradition of seeking justice. So our choice then is clear from the start. If we want to be Jesus' disciples, that is, Jesus' followers, we can't just simply coast along and conform to the norms of our society. We have to choose a different definition of well-being, a different model of success. In fact, a new identity with a new set of values. We have to be prepared to march to the beat of a different drummer, to use Henry David Thoreau's metaphor. We have to be ready to take the road that's less traveled by, a metaphor from poet Robert Frost. And if we do so, Jesus is clear right from the start of his very first sermon that we're going to end up paying a price if we make that choice, if we step out and stand up for things that others do not stand for. But he also promises that we will discover many priceless rewards. We will experience what it's like to be part of God's kingdom. We will experience the warmth of God's comfort when we grieve. We'll feel the enjoyment of the gift of earth and life itself. The satisfaction of seeing God's restorative justice come alive. The joy of receiving mercy ourselves. We'll have the direct experience of God's presence among us. We'll have the honor of associating with God and being in league with the prophets of old. That's the kind of identity Jesus invites us to seek with him. Unquote. Those words from Brian McLaren help us to see how surprising these character traits are which Jesus outlined at the start of his Sermon on the Mount. And I can't help but make a comparison between this list of character traits in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and the kinds of things that Scouting encourages from its members. At the start of every troop meeting or Cub Pack meeting, maybe even in some of your den meetings, you say, a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, help me here, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent. Those 12 character traits help define what it means to be a scout. It's how you're going to think. It's how you're going to behave. And when you meet somebody who is not trustworthy, you say, oh, watch out. When you meet somebody who is a person who is not friendly, not courteous, not kind, you know that joker is not a scout, not in the least. Not no way. You get out of their way because they're going to be bad news. Now, nobody gets all 12 of those scout laws perfectly. You're come as close as anybody, Wyatt, with your on the verge of being an Eagle Scout with all the merit badges. But nobody gets all 12 of those traits perfectly all of the time. Any more than any of us who follow Jesus live up to the 7 Beatitudes and the other teachings in Jesus' gospel. Not always, not all the time. Being Christian kind of comes and goes like the tide. Some days you're really Christian, and some days you're hardly holding on. But at least knowing those 12 traits of being a good scout and knowing those Beatitudes gives us markers along the way to see how we're doing. They give us sort of like a bullseye in the target, something that we can aim for. Even if we miss it sometimes, we know where we're aiming. And I think it's great that you have that character traits all memorized, that whole list. You corrected me even as I was going through them. You know them by heart. You can say them with your mouth. But the real question is, do you do them? Do you actually behave the way the Scout Oath asks you to, right? You know, on my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, to obey the Scout Law, to help other people at all times, and keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, morally straight. I don't want anybody to feel guilty. I'm not picking on our scouts. I'm actually applauding you for your values. The fact is, many of us in this room quite often, too often, fail to do anything about what we say we believe, right? We say we believe certain things, and we believe those things, and we tell other people this is what we believe, but do we do it, right? We may know something to be true, but that knowledge in itself doesn't necessarily motivate us to take any action. We just know it. And we go on about our day, knowing something. We hear something that we believe is true. We may even pass it on to others. We may email them and text them and say, did you know this? I believe it's true. Because we know it's true. But hearing it and knowing it and even saying it